You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Allan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Most photographers prefer cameras they can use right out of the box. Jeffrey Berliner, the executive director of the Penumbra Foundation and the Center for Alternative Photography here in Manhattan, is not one of those people. Jeff's been building what are commonly referred to as Frankencameras, and they are essentially functional camera mashups using components from various cameras, some of them going back 100 years or more. Best part, Jeff actually uses these unique cameras for alternative process portraiture and landscapes. This is also Jeff's second appearance on our show as a guest. One more appearance and you get a free t-shirt.
Oh, can't wait.
Yeah, we did a laundry last night. I think we have a clean one in your size. I'll bring it in for you next week. Also joining us today is the man who makes Jeff's dreams come true, Frank Rubio. Also known as the camera doctor. Frank is a master technician and repair person. Frank worked as the in-house repair whiz at Lens and Repro here in Manhattan for 15 years. Before that, Frank was a photographer and a repairman for the Army, which is where he received his photographic training. About 2 years ago, I had a rare wide-angle lens that needs some serious attention. The technicians at the factory where it was made could not help me. They didn't even have the parts. I brought it to Frank, and 2 weeks later, I was out shooting with it. The man knows his stuff.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, Frank, thanks for inviting us over to your shop today.
Thank you, Allan.
Great space, right?
This is good. We're actually in the middle of a dark room surrounded by alternative processing tools and techniques, things to hold heads still when doing long exposures during portraits, and about 20 view cameras, and as well as a table full of Frankencameras, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And I think it's also worth mentioning, we were setting up here this morning, we opened up an old folding table that is covered with chemical stains. And being a true photographer, Jeff stopped what he's doing, took out his phone and started doing close-ups of the splash. It looks so cool.
And Allan just rubbed his face up against it, right?
I was just bonding with the stuff. It was just
Jackson Pollock type thing
about
going on.
the smell, the odor that's here as well.
We are wearing hazmat suits here today.
Yeah, it's like pickling juice.
Jeff, when did you start making these Franken-monster cameras?
It's interesting. I've been a photographer. I didn't study photography. I studied religion and philosophy, but I always had a camera. My father, who was an artist and an art teacher, High School of Art and Design in New York City, and my grandfather was a photographer, photo retoucher for the New York Times. He went to Cooper Union. Anyway, so, all my life I've had cameras. My father gave me a Kodak Instamatic, and I still have it. In fact, when he passed away, I went through his stuff, and there it was with the little manual wrapped around it that he put aside for me that I found. And my father always had Leicas and Rollies and things like that, and he was always dropping them and breaking them. I couldn't touch them and hold them, but he can break them as much as he wanted. And he would, bring me to all these camera stores, Lens and Repro, PhotoCare, Harvey Zucker,
Sure.
a photographer's place, Ken Hansen, you name it. I mean, like a Saturday with my dad was like schlepping around, or a Sunday, depending on the store, because a lot of the stores weren't open on Saturday. Hanging out, looking at cameras, and also getting film processed, all this sort of stuff. And it was just in my blood. So I had, my first camera was the Instamatic, and then I had a Canon F, the original F Canon, and then I had a Pentax K1000. And then when I was in graduate school, I had enough money. I was a teaching fellow. I earned enough money so I can buy a Leica. But I didn't have that much money, so I bought a CL. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of started the ball rolling, where I just wanted to get more into Leica. Then I wanted to get into larger formats and bigger negatives, and then larger formats, 4x5. So I got into Rollies, and I got into 4x5s, Linhoffs. And I just, I'm a dog with a bone. It just keeps on going and going. And then I go to the flea market, find a huge brass lens. And then, what was that used for? Well, I found it was used for 19th century photography. Then I wanted to learn about that. So the idea is just, being curious and getting old equipment and then wanting it to work and then trying to fix it myself. And that's where Frank comes in. So I would, buy these old cameras and I would try to repair them and, of course, break them even worse. And then I would bring them to Lens and Repro, and Jeffrey Kay, who was and Steve, incredibly generous, would let me go and speak to Frank. Not many people were allowed to go back at Lens and Repro and see Frank. And I would show it to Frank. And
he'd show up in my counter there.
Yeah. And I'd have his camera.
And Frank would go, oh no.
We'd start the discussion. He says, can you fix this? I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Frank, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, how was it learning photography and repair in the Army?
Well, I always had a love for photography. I guess it started with, just like you, Jeffrey, my grandfather. And he had what I thought was a really interesting camera. It happened to be a Rolly, a twin lens reflex. And it just captured my eye. It just looked so different than anything else. And I always saw it. I saw him shooting with it. He was also a painter. So, he was just an artist in his own right. I didn't know that. I used to see him doing that all the time. It wasn't until I was probably in junior high school or something like that I wanted to pursue photography, and found out that he had a whole darkroom set up as well. So eventually I acquired all that stuff from him, and there went the whole adventure of photography and all. Went into the military. And I chose what I wanted to do in the military. I just didn't sign up. I knew that you could be a photographer in the military. So I pursued that and first went to the Air Force. Told me no such thing. I said, that's not true. Found out the school was actually at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. So I happened to was doing, working as a photographer, doing weddings like a lot of people kind of do and start in high school. And the Army recruiters happened to be, my clients at the time. And I went to them and I say, hey, listen, I know I can be a photographer in the military, and give me the real deal. So luckily, knowing people and knowing some Army recruiters, I was able to get in there. And actually, photography wasn't available. The slots were all taken. My next choice was a camera technician. And I had a love for, tearing things apart, seeing how things worked, the mechanisms, that whole thing. Fascinated with that. So it was right down my alley. And
the classes were they taught by Army folks, or did they send you out to a school?
The school was at the time was at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado, and I was the only Army in my class. The rest were all Marines. No Navy in my class at that time, but all branches went to school together. And it's a very intense course. It was, I believe, about 8 months. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Of training.
You mentioned early on High School of Art and Design. When I was there, the curriculum was based on the Navy photographic training courses, which were incredibly complex and detailed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Not messing around. If you can get a military training on camera photography and repair, it's thorough. I don't know what it's like today, but
well, if you get your hands on any of the old manuals, the manuals, the service manuals, that's another thing. People find that I don't necessarily read books or novels or things, but what I end up reading are manuals. They're my go-to.
Did they teach you on one camera system, or did you have to learn a range?
You were trained depending on what the government contracted to buy at the time. So you eventually learned on many different things. You became a jack of all trades when it came to the cameras because, again, it was whatever the government, agreed to buy or purchase for, during that time. So it was anywhere from Hasselblads and, Graflexes and Bronicas and Pentexes, just the whole gamut of things. A lot of, believe it or not, even in the 80s, a lot of the Army were still using speed graphics, 4x5. And, people don't realize it. Yeah, they were still, that's why you find a lot of kits these days in really beautiful shape because you'll find them at auctions. Yeah.
Any reconnaissance cameras? Did you work on any of those cameras that were up in the air?
I did work on a few of those. There was a whole separate, usually that was dealt by the Air Force. they did break it up.
But wait a second, the Air Force doesn't have photography,
right?
Right? Did you say that early on?
That's what they told me. They just wanted me to, they just wanted their quota for me to sign up. They didn't expect this young kid to come in and actually know what he was talking about, do the research, So
something I'm curious about before we start talking, because we're going to be talking about some bizarre cameras here today. From your perspective, Frank, most photographers, I would say probably 95% of the photographers out there, they know how to use their camera. They're great taking pictures. They have no idea what's going on under the hood. You do. Does that affect how you approach photography at all, knowing the mechanics and all of the theory and all of the stuff that goes on underneath the skin of the camera?
I'm sure it does. I know it does. Well, I don't probably think about it now because it's so second nature for me.
But it's there in the background.
It is there. I do think about it. For instance, on doing a location job, what's going to be more, better to take, for instance, mechanically versus electronically. I mean, at a point when I did my own little photo adventure in Moab. A few years back, that's when the phase 1 system, digital cameras coming out, and I was like, I didn't want to rely on battery power. I'm going to be in the middle of nowhere,
right.
Electronics and all this, So basically, that's when I discovered by putting the phase 1 back with my Hasselblad V system, and the results out of that were just incredible. And everybody saw my images, and what did he do? I just processed the image digitally, but nothing more than that. And they realized that it was the combination of those lenses and the digital back. Bring those two together, we got better results than everything being so optimized just for digital.
Interesting.
So what's your the first camera you guys built together? But would it be fair to say that, Jeff, you're Dr. Frankenstein and Frank, you're Igor? Would it be
No, I think just to get to back to that point.
We'll cut that out. Don't worry.
I think I'm both actually.
Yeah, and I'm both too.
I'm a mix.
I think we go back and forth.
It's just our mad minds of trying to create things.
And we do go back and forth. I mean, Frank will come and say, Jeff, what do you think of this? From time to time, and I'm more often coming in and saying, I need to do this. How do I need to do it? And I almost feel like, I should be working, for Frank, little by little, learning more.
So you guys
skills.
really do collaborate. This is really a 50-50 thing here.
Every day.
Okay.
Every day we're going back and forth, asking questions or things. I mean, Jeffrey is extremely knowledgeable and an expert in lenses, where that's something I don't necessarily have that knowledge or expertise in the optics part.
What he knows about lenses frightens me.
It really does. Mechanically putting them all together, that's where he comes to me and says, "Is this supposed to go this way or that way?" and stuff. And I said, "No, it goes this way, that way." So,
I think necessity is really the mother of invention. I think photography is problem solving, and I think it starts with you have a project and how you're going to do it. It could be low light, or it could be wet plate, it could be alternative process, it could be film, or it could be digital. And then you have to say to yourself, well, how am I going to accomplish that? And then if you have enough knowledge, and it gets to the mechanical knowledge that Frank has, or the mechanical knowledge that I have, but I can't always figure out how to get these things together, will bring you to the solution. And that whole process of figuring it out is what I really love. So with wet plate, which is ASA1, speed is very important. And then if I'm shooting children in the studio and they're moving and I can't, clamp them in, that's why I came up with the Graflex system, where Frank put in a PC switch so I can use strobe with it and a fast lens. And then, of course, infinity is an issue, so we worry about where it fits in the camera, and corresponding with the film plane, and not having the mirror in the way. So all these things start coming into play, and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to accomplish this problem?
You just start taking things and just start putting them together. You take your ideas, what you might have in mind, and like this Graflex we have in Super D we have in front of us. You can see that. The front has some tape on it. You do things to find out. It's
I like tape.
It's like like any design of anything or research. You start prototyping something. You figure out, okay, this needs to go this way. That needs to go that way. Well, this needs to be cut down that way.
Let's start with this Graflex that's in front of us.
And by the way, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to see what we're talking about, we have photographs of these cameras on our landing page. So go to our page, and you'll see, as you're listening, you can see what we're talking about.
So this Graflex that we have in front of us, or this combination of lens and camera we have in front of us. What was the inspiration for this?
The inspiration for this is the Graflex 4x5 Super D. And it has a Graflock back on it. The earlier ones had a Graflex back. A different kind of film holder went in there. The Graflock back allows you to put Polaroid backs on it, regular modern film holders.
All contemporary
contemporary roll film backs. And I've been using these cameras, for many years for film and for Polaroid and things like that. But I wanted to start using them in the tintype studio. And the tintype studio has particular needs, especially since we started using strobe. And the strobe came about because we wanted to photograph children and pets. So you can't put a pet in a headrest. They don't want to stay still. So the idea was to be able to focus with the subject. So I got the idea of, and I knew that and we also want to shoot larger formats. So the idea was and I also have a 5x7 like that as well that I modified. There is an 8x10 Graflex. I'm trying to track it down. I know where it is. It won't tell me. But
I've only seen pictures.
Yeah. So the idea is to be able to handhold, have a single lens reflex so you can focus with your subject and then hit the shutter and fire the strobe. And the camera that already existed for that was the only one is the 4x5 Super D. And the reason why the Super D or the single lens reflex, so you can focus, some people could probably use a speed graphic, which has a rangefinder, but that has a really small lens board. So the idea behind this was to be able to put very large, fast lenses, because you're limited. The strobe is only so powerful. I mean, I'm maxing out at 4,800 watt cycles. And I want to be able to just hit that shutter and capture that image with a very fast lens. So this Graflex allows me to put a fast lens on it. So the front has been modified so that we can put longer lenses for nice perspective on the front standard. We carved it out, and we can swap out lenses. I actually even also made a adjustable iris, universal clamp, so we can swap out lenses on that goes on the front of this camera. You can also put the standard lens on the inside. But the idea is to put a long fast lens. This has a Petzl portrait lens, 9-inch f4, which is sort of the magic number for strobe. And then this camera has built-in strobe capability. It has a bi-post strobe connection. What happened with this camera, we were putting so much ridiculous amount of electricity through it that I think we burnt out that bi-tube, that bi-post. And Frank actually replaced that bi-post a couple of times. So then I said, well, what's the solution to that? Because I can't rely on that. If you're doing a job or if you're shooting in the studio, you have to be, and you're working with kids, you have to have that strobe working. So Frank said, I'll put a PC switch on that. I'm like, what's that? Well, that's a little switch you put in there. And he put a little connector for a PC cord. And there's a little switch on the inside. So when the mirror pops up, it hits, it pops up and hits the switch and fires the strobe.
And that's when that little clown pops up the top.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Now, were you basing that on something you'd seen already, or that was totally
any shutter mechanism, it's based on an open and close system. So it's even on 35 millimeter cameras, it's all the sync is attached to the shutter in some manner, some kind of way, so that it gets proper sync. In this case, I'm able to do it by installing a micro switch and wiring a standard PC sync on the side. The key is you do have to operate this in the open position when you're fully open because of the size of the shutter.
And then the mirror is in the down position, which is preventing the plate or the film from being exposed. So the mirror pops up, the light comes in, the strobe hits, and then the shutter comes down and you have your exposure.
What would be one of the more adventurous cameras you guys cobbled together?
I don't know. That's a good question. This is a good one. I mean, he worked on the home portrait for me, which is a 5x7 camera. He put a PC switch on that, and he modified the back. So that's an interesting camera because
can you bring that over here?
Sure.
Let's talk about that.
So what's interesting about the home portrait is that unlike many other Graflex cameras, especially SLRs.
Oh, this is the one I put the spring back on for you.
Right.
So tell us about it. Like camera and then lens.
Well, Frank can talk about that.
This one Jeffrey brought to me. He wanted to make it easier to use, of course, and with modern film backs and such. So he actually that's what back is that from,
It's a
Jeff?
Cambo.
Cambo.
And I chose that because one of the issues with these cameras is that the film plane in relative to the ground glass on the top, the viewing glass, the reflex ground glass is important. And if you have a ground glass, this is where you sort of envisioning and thinking about these things, is that there's only so much distance you can move that ground glass up. So the further out you bring your film back, the higher up the ground glass has to go to correspond to the film plane.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
So I had to find a ground glass modern back that had a very short, narrow profile so that I can keep it as close to the back of the body as possible. So that gave Frank the right amount of distance or leeway to find the right focus for the ground glass in relation to the film back. So
that would allow the camera to still close up and be portable without.
Right.
Okay. You could always put other backs on there, but then I would have to modify the screen, the focusing screen itself, and then in that case it would not close.
So, and that would also sacrifice your close focusing
right.
distance. Is that correct?
Every all those things come into play. One
Okay.
thing's going to affect another, and that'll affect this and that, and that's where you kind of what may work in your mind, in your head, necessarily may not work physically, and that's where we start bringing everything together, and then we find out exactly
Where the common ground is, where the happy medium
right.
is.
And exactly.
And then I try
There's
to
a lot
find-
of happy mediums.
a lot of compromises. But then in knowing and understanding, that's why mechanics is very important. In knowing and understanding these aspects of photography and in relational aspects, it's very important that before you start, finding the right thing. Because I could have just found any ground glass back, and Frank would say, "Oh, that's not going to work," So what I
already been down that road.
I would have been that road. So I already think ahead of time and know that the distance is very important. So I found the narrowest one I can find, which was a Cambo 5x7,
which worked very well. It worked really well.
It worked really well.
Do you have a date on this camera? More or less?
This camera is probably about 1910. And the thing about the home portrait, the reason I chose home portrait 5x7 is it's the only 5x7 Graflex that has a rotating back. So I have the horizontal or landscape orientation or the portrait orientation. And so that was very important. And it also allows you to take interchangeable lenses and a large lens board, because a lot of the lenses that I use are fast and you need to be able to mount them. Another aspect of this camera doesn't have a shutter in it. And the reason I chose that camera, I actually sent that camera to be repaired for the shutter by a guy named Fred Lustig, who passed away. He was a Graflex repairman. He worked for Graflex, and then when Graflex went out of business, he purchased all their parts, and he actually made shutters for these things. And he couldn't repair it because it had been dropped, so the shutter wouldn't. He put a new shutter in it, it just wouldn't fire correctly. So he sent it back without the shutter, and since I don't need a shutter for wet plate, I just basically set it up with a PC switch, which Frank mounted to it. I put a Petzl portrait lens.
I was going to ask, what's the story with the lens?
It's a Peerless. I forget the name of that. It's an American Scoville. It's a Scoville Peerless. It's an American, portrait lens from probably the 1860s, I would say.
So the lens predates the camera.
Yeah, and that's the kind of lens that would have been used on a wet plate camera of the period. And because wet plate collodion tintype photography is so slow, ASA1, you don't need a shutter. You just need to in order to stop the light, you hit the strobe, which is the dominant light source, and then you just bring the mirror back down. And the mirror acts like the light trap. Not all single lens reflex cameras have that. I mean, Graflex is one of the only ones where the mirror covers the entire film plane. Many other reflex cameras, the mirror doesn't cover completely. Though it's smaller, it actually gives you a narrower profile because of that. But it also means that, if the shutter were up and the mirror were down, light is still getting through. Mm-hmm. So, you have to think about those things when you decide what camera you're going to choose for these types of things.
The purpose for this modification was then to use it again in the tintype studio.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So you had the lens that you wanted to use to kind of replicate the era, and you built the camera, or you modified the camera to fix that.
Yeah, and I have to modify it even more because that lens is very heavy. Aluminum lenses, there's Cook lenses. A Cook lens I'm going to put on there that had an aluminum barrel. There's also a Meyer Trioplan. There were there were a lot of lenses that used aluminum around that period, 1910. They used magnesium, which actually was not very stable, so it started cracking, so they started using aluminum. And the idea was for a handheld photographer, they wanted to have as light a lens as possible.
And are they easy to find? I mean, well, they're not easy to find, but how hard are they to find?
They're pretty hard at this point. Things have been really fished out of the ocean of lenses.
Could you tell our listeners how many pets of lenses you own?
Well, I mean, I don't know how many pets full. I probably own about 1,500 to 2,000 lenses.
Now you know why there are none left in the
They're
market.
all in the ocean. Yeah, they're all in my ocean. They're all in my ocean.
Jeffrey owns them all.
He's the Hunt brothers of pets of lenses.
But keep in mind that when I was collecting, they were throwing them away. People
Yeah, you could buy them
care.
by the pound back then.
And I did. I didn't know what they were. Curiosity. I didn't know what they were. I wanted to find out. I wanted to see how they rendered images and light. And I think, curiosity, it wasn't people say, oh, you're a hoarder. Well, I guess I am. But I'm a very curious hoarder, and I'm working on a book on them, but also photographic equipment. And the thing is, when you have every different lens, and you know the focal length, you know what they do, when you have a project, if it's a large format, you have it, and if you want a particular perspective, you have it. If you want a particular look, coded, not coded, flat field, curved field.
Before you break the rules, know the rules, and you know all the rules.
I know all the rules, and I know how to break them, too.
But what's interesting about those old lenses, though, it's the glass itself, too. You can have several of the same lenses, and each one of them can actually end up giving you a different
signature and different look.
Different
Absolutely.
signature.
That's
That's
correct.
a good way to put it. It's a good, signature.
Mm-hmm.
So it happened quite a bit with the Pentec lenses.
Yeah.
I worked with a lot of Pentec lenses, and I don't think I saw one of them that gave that same bouquet in there. Everything was different. Some was more pronounced. Some was very subtle. Some was very creamy.
If you know what you're looking at, choosing a lot of these older lenses, and I don't think you could say this about modern lenses.
No, you can't.
But with older classic lenses like this that go back decades or 100 years, it's not much different than a musician picking up a similarly aged violin or instrument where they each have their own personalities and notes. And if you understand what you're listening to, or in this case, looking at, you can actually choose a lens to.
Oh, absolutely! They're like paintbrushes,
paintbrushes, exactly.
But even on the violin analogy, even bows. I knew a bow maker who worked with very, very renowned violinists, and they each had a different feel. They had a different springiness to it, or a different weight to them. Then they would be modified. To get back to the Pentec thing, they were made during the war. They were very fast. A lot of people liked them because they're f2.9 for an 8-inch lens, which is pretty fast for that kind of a large format lens. And it gave wonderful bokeh, which is the quality of the out of focus area. During the Second World War, these were reconnaissance lenses, Air Ministry. They were made by Dallmeyer and Ross, and they made them so quickly. And the quality wasn't great. They just wanted to get them on the airplanes. So you don't know who was grinding them. A lot of them were ground by hand, and they just wanted to get, so each one had a different signature. And you're not going to know how they look. Sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they're flat, sometimes they're contrasty. And that's the reason for lenses like that. But, for pencil portrait lenses, they were all hand ground, and that had an effect on the image quality, but they all age a little differently. Interesting, the coating on lenses came about because there were old photographies, they were on the turn of the century, who were using some of these old pencil portrait lenses, and because of the metals in the glass, they would develop this oxidation on the surface. Like a blooming, it was called. And it was discovered that blooming was giving them more contrast. It was actually concentrating, giving higher resolution of the light passing through the glass. And they ended up loving those lenses more. And then, of course, the lens companies discovered that oxidation could be used. If they can recreate that oxidation to create coating, it would give you higher contrast. Of course, that's corresponded with color photography, which requires much more concentration of light.
The spectrum falls into focus in a tighter band.
But it's also cutting down flare, and it's giving you much more saturation and concentration of light.
So, Frank, I'm sorry. That old adage that they don't make them like they used to, is it? Would you say that's pretty accurate?
That's very true.
And can you put like a date even on when you start? And I'm not talking about film to digital, but even in the film era, when you can start to see
I think the
things.
big change in the manufacturing and of the cameras, the qualities really started changing probably in the 70s, the early 70s. Then when we started developing, plastic, and the space age plastics, all the different types of plastics, and everything was being made out of plastic, and still to this day. And that's what I really hate as a technician. It just doesn't hold up to that. I mean, going back to talking about the lenses, as a young technician, I learned several times not to clean a lens of a customer's or a client's, because they would come in with their lens and of course, as a technician, I'd clean it up, make everything nice and pretty again. But some of these 100-year-old lenses, they shot them exactly the way they were, with the dirt and the grime and the crud that was all over it, because that was giving them that look that they were looking for. Right. As soon as I cleaned that up, it wasn't there anymore. It was gone. So, I learned that quick.
I never clean these glasses. The ones I wear.
Yeah, no.
It's amazing.
A lot of things you don't clean. We'll talk about that.
Amazing what you don't see. That's the key, right? It's what you don't want to see, I guess.
So maybe we should bring over another camera.
But this is a completely different one. It looks like a Rolleiflex. This is a ROCCA. I've never heard of this. Got a German lens. It's a twin lens. Looks like a Yashica Rolli, but it's not. What could you tell us about this guy?
It's a German camera, and the reason I started using that, I mean, I didn't want to use the Rolleiflexes are going up in value. It seems that they just keep going. I mean, there was a time when people were literally thinking that film was going to be gone and dead, and people were selling them on eBay and other places just to get rid of them. They thought, I might as well get the money out of them that I can at this moment. And I was kind of one of those people. And at that time, I was like, I couldn't believe that you can, maybe 15 years ago, you can buy like a 2.8F Rolli or something like that, for a couple of $100.
Yeah.
Everybody
was bailing.
Everybody was bailing. And it was a strange time because, you got to save up for those things. You wanted one, you had to say, or a Leica, and then it just seemed like the floor fell out from under that whole market. But then when I started getting into wet plate collodion photography, I needed a fast lens, so I didn't want to use a 3.5. This is a 2.8. I also wanted to use some of these cameras for wet plate. So this camera doesn't have a huge amount of modification, but it does have a fast lens, and it's a well-made camera. So what I did is I opened up the back and I painted the inside with something called spar urethane, which is a very hard material that will allow you to take a glass plate or tin type and put it in the back and use it for wet plate collodion photography. And that's a lot of what the modifications that I do, because I need to use these cameras in the tin type studio, or I need to use them for other types of things. And this is the kind of camera, if you didn't want to bring a big kit out into the field, you wanted to have a small little dark box, and you can buy them now, and bring a small kit out and get a nice, but keep in mind that if you shoot a glass negative with this, it's ASA1, the resolution is amazing. You can blow up that negative very large, much larger than if it was a 2.25 film negative. So this gives you all kinds of possibilities. You just modify it a little bit, make a glass plate, put it in the back, do your exposure, take it out, develop it. Then you can print it and do all kinds of things. So the idea is to repurpose and find different ways to use some of these old cameras. And this camera is, it's not an inexpensive camera, but it's not a $2,000 camera. It's maybe a couple of $100.
What's as a side question, what's the latitude of a plate that has ISO 1 going for it? How much room do you have for exposure slop?
Well, you need a lot of exposure. You need a lot of light.
I mean, be off by 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops.
Well, you have you have latitude in your development, I think.
Okay.
That's more your development than you do.
So that's where you do your fine tuning, right there.
Yeah, that's whenever I watch you guys your process, and I think I'd have to say that's probably more where you have the more latitude is where you can. Control that more.
It affects your contrast and things like that. But I think with wet plate it's ASA1, and you have a dynamic range of about 5 stops. You don't get really blacks. You don't get really white, but you get a wonderful, nice orthochromatic palette, which is nice. It's a different look. It's a little bit of tonality. It's not true monochrome because collodion does have a color cast. For wet plate, what's really, really important is having the right exposure in relation to the right development. So, and we always gauge the exposure by how fast your development is. So if you're in the 10 to 15 second range, then you've got a good exposure. And then you can adjust your exposure. If somebody has darker skin, you want to give it a little more light. If they have lighter skin, you need a little less light because you want to maintain as much detail as possible. But you can control that with the development. So the development, if it goes really fast, you want to stop that development. But then you get a very contrasty image. So it's overexposed if your development is really quick. So, it's not, dissimilar than film. Your film, your ASA, and your exposure, your development time. You can mess around, you can make it a little more contrast, a little flatter, that sort of thing. And wet plate falls into that category.
Now, I know most of what you do has to do with traditional alternative processes. Have you considered, or are you doing anything with digital backs on some of these older cameras?
We have, and I think Frank was modifying. I don't know if he finished doing it. Was modifying a Graflex with the digital back, and I think that's a fun thing to do. I think one of the things I do is I have my Sony Alpha 7, and that's a technology that really allows you to put different kinds of lenses onto the camera because because of the distance between the film and people understand. And understanding mechanics really helps you to understand how to use these things. So the reason why it's hard to put these lenses on a Nikon SLR or a Leica SLR or a Canon SLR is because of the distance from the film plane to the mount. The mirror gets in the way.
Right.
When you have a mirrorless camera, it's a very short distance, and all you have to do to make the lens work is get an adapter that pulls it further away. You can never bring it close enough. That's the problem with the mirror camera. But when you have a distance between the mount and the film plane or the digital plane, then all you have to do is pull it out. And that opens up a world for every lens. And I have a lot of lenses, which I want to try, a lot of lenses that were made for a different kind of Exacta mount, Leica mount, Nikon mount, and then I have the cinema camera, the old Petzl lenses, little projection lenses, all kinds of things.
What have you put on A7?
Oh, everything. You know what I love?
We try whether we think it's going to work or not. We try to figure it out and says, well, what's this going to do?
Exactly.
And you need to create the adapters if they don't exist?
Well, I mean, with the technology now and these CNC machines and computer technology now, they're in China.
In China, yeah.
There's a lot of third-party adapters that are already made, that are well, done that are much cheaper than I can actually make here with the materials that I can get in the United States and equipment. So I often tell people, do some research and just find out what mount you're going from what mount to mount. And start there. That's going to be your most cost-effective way to approach it. And then once they finalize what they're looking for, whatever, if it's not out there, then come to me and come to us here at Camera Doctor, and we'll see
done it,
how we can figure it out and make some kind of adapter,
right.
And machine it. Yeah.
I mean, the one adapter talking about it a little earlier is there are these adapters now that have built-in helicoids.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful thing because I have many of these earlier lenses that have a minimum focus of 3 feet. Some wonderful early, like an early Leica Summilux, which didn't allow you to get too close for portraiture. So that really opened up the world of being able to use some of these longer focus minimum lenses with the helicoid that lets you get closer, and that really opens up the range for a lot of these older lenses.
Yeah, I have an A7R2, and I've had a few of the A7s already, and most of my lenses are M-mount lenses from Voigtlander or Leica.
Sure.
And I have the VME adapter from
Right.
which has a 4mm
Right.
helicoid. All of my lenses focus far closer than they would on the camera they were intended for.
Right.
And that's one of the things I love about it.
Yeah.
Right. And again, like when we first started, when I told you the short story about going out to Moab and discovering the phase one back to use with the V system and using all. And one of my favorite lenses was their 30mm fisheye lens.
Oh yeah.
And the images that I got from that were just amazing. I was just excited. I thought I discovered something all new. It was just a matter of bringing the two technologies together. The quality of those old lenses to that modern technology of capturing. It captured so much more that I didn't expect to catch.
And it had nothing to do with sharpness.
Exactly.
Nothing to do
Exactly.
Well,
with
sharpness is another issue. I just wanted to bring up, just to get to this idea of the digital back, is that there are a couple of photographers that I like. A guy named Andrew Moore who shoots digitally, and he's done some stitching. So he used it on a view camera, and he has other kinds of camera where he would, because of that chip is only 6
Right.
by 4.5 centimeters. If you wanted to capture an image, you would, and not have everything on that one chip. You can, put it on the adapter. You can put on the back of your view camera, and then you can move that digital back and take several images
And then stitch them.
and then stitch them together. Another guy that does that does amazing work is a guy named Jeff Liao, who uses sort of old and new technology with these digital backs and view cameras.
What do we have here?
So this is a stereo. It's basically it's called a stereographic. It's a I like Graflex. I think you can tell.
Yes, Jeffrey loves his stereo.
I love stereo.
He's got them
photography.
in just about all formats, I think.
I love every format. I love being confronted with something that I think is impossible and then trying to achieve it. I love stereo photography. It's a form of encounter to me. You take especially stereo portraiture. I love portraiture because I love making images of people. When you make a stereo image of somebody, you really feel like you're confronting them and seeing them. It's this. For me, it's as close to reality. It's still clearly an abstraction. So I've modified several stereo cameras, and this is a stereographic. It's a 5x7 camera with a focal plane shutter. It's like a speed graphic with 2 lenses, and I have these 2 stereo Petzval lenses that are from the 1850s. The name of the photographer is engraved on the lenses. It's a match.
Great. But these lenses were never meant to go together.
They were
originally.
the match set.
They were a match set. Oh, okay.
And I bought them from a camera dealer, and I looked up the photographer, and it turns out he had a studio. His name was C.J. Fox. He had a studio. He was a Daguerrean and a wet plate clothing photographer. He had a studio down in the Bowery.
Correct. This board, that's probably a board that Jeffrey made.
Yeah.
But usually he'll come up with an idea, and then we'll come up with a lens board, and we'll cut it to size it up and find out what the proper distance is between. Because that's important as well, the space between the lenses.
Yeah.
That people, you can't just have them right up and next to each other. They have to be.
Yeah, and Frank
You have to find
understands all these
find all
things.
that stuff.
Yeah, he knows. He has incredible experience.
What kind of camera? What camera do you think it was on originally?
It was probably on a camera not that different from this one. It was probably a landscape type camera, but these are portrait lenses, so it was most likely used as a stereo portrait camera.
And the camera itself?
Could have been an Anthony or a Scoville, a stereo camera of the period that would have a septum in the middle. What's wonderful about this camera is that in order to make sure that the light is divided correctly between the 2 images, you have to have a barrier, or it's called a septum. What's wonderful about this camera is that it has a movable. It's like a what are those things?
It's an
those blinds?
expandable.
It's an expandable.
It's a septum that will move as you're racking out the focus. It'll extend out so that and then it kind of folds back.
That was part of the original?
Yeah, that's what's great about these old cameras. The details and the things that they do are.
Yes.
Often Jeffrey and I will look at something and we'll get caught up on the craftsmanship of how they did that, or that it was all made by hand, that they actually came up with that.
Right.
And some modern cameras don't even work that well.
No. And interestingly, some of the early stereo cameras had these sort of pleated bellows type septums in there, and they always flopped and got in the way. What's wonderful about it, which is why I like using this camera, it's a spring-loaded just sheet of like bellows material that's never in the way.
This is the one. This is the one that's on the little roller.
Yeah, it's on the
this
little roller. Yeah.
that it rolls up just like a
blind.
Right. Except
window blind.
Yeah, you just see it kind of works vertically as you're racking and out the focus.
I was going to ask this later, but have you guys ever been stumped in the sense that you found something in a camera that you just didn't know its purpose?
I have, sure.
I think we've often come across things. It's like why some things are the way they are, and we still can't figure them out, or what did this particular lens go to because we can't figure out what camera it went to at one point. That kind of thing.
Eric, I just found. He just showed me before I came in for this interview, a booklet, a Fulmer and Schwing booklet on professional darkroom apparatus. And I love old catalogs because you get to look through them and see what these things are. You find out, and I was looking through it, and there's these wonderful things. And Eric said, well, there's a lot of things in there that we have that we don't know what they are. And now we know what they are. And I said, yeah, that's what's wonderful about these old catalogs. And, I never throw anything out because you never know when you're going to need it. You don't know what purpose. It could be repurposed. It could be used for something you want to do. And I think not knowing what something is, it's a lot of fun. It's, what is it? How are we
And
gonna
those
find out?
old catalogs are illustrated extremely well.
Wonderful. They're beautiful
So
objects.
you just have to look at the pictures and you learn the whole
Figure
thing.
it out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I have a collection of lens catalog. I probably have the largest in the world. I probably have several hundred of those because they're primary source material. They really teach us a great deal.
Right. And you've used this in the...
Oh yeah, I use it all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, all
okay.
the cameras that are here are ones I specifically wanted to bring ones that Frank had worked on and helped me
And
with.
he uses them.
Yeah.
And I use them, and then I break them, and then I bring them back because they get a lot of use. It's amazing; they hold up very well, but they are old.
You can say Jeffrey has a different camera in his hands every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about that?
Oh, that's a wonderful
Yeah,
camera.
yeah.
That's a camera that Frank helped me with in terms of the wet plate back. But I'll describe it. It's called a carte de visite camera. So it takes a 5x7 plate, and it has four lenses. And it was designed originally. It was used primarily in late 50s, 1860s Civil War period. Abraham Lincoln would have been photographed with a camera like this. I think this is either an American Optical or a Scoville. There were a lot of companies that made them. The idea behind this was to make either a tin type or a glass plate negative that can then be 4 images of the same subject and then can be printed as carte de visite, which were types of cards. Carte de visite is a visiting card. Originally they were calling cards, but that format, I forget the exact size of it, 2.5 inches by whatever, 3 1/4 or 4 inches, something like that. You can print 4 images at a time, and they were like the celebrity of the baseball card of the period. So you can take the glass negative and print them on albumin paper, and then you would have the name of the person. It was the first sort of celebrity photography.
Right.
So Abraham Lincoln was photographed, like Civil War, and many others. So what I did was I modified the camera. I made these 4 little doors on the front so that I can do 4 different exposures at one time. So I can shoot 4 images. Interestingly, the 2 side-by-side images give you a stereo image, but I set it up so that I can do 4 separate images or 4 separate exposures, and we make something called animated GIFs.
Okay. Oh,
So
I
you would
remember
have,
you talking about this.
and if you go to like
like a modern day photo booth.
right,
Right.
it's very Moy-Bridgian, I guess. It's like a photo booth.
And how do you open these?
So they just
By
close.
hand?
Yeah, by
Just
hand.
Just
yeah.
by hand.
Yeah, one at a
Open
time.
and close.
Yeah,
One at a
so
time,
because it's the sensitivity is so slow that you can just close it, do another pose, open the next one, and then on the table back there is a 9 lens, and I used that recently to make an animated GIF of a dancer in tintype, so that she did a particular choreographed piece in 9 images, and I shot each particular
He has them
image.
numbered and each cap.
Each cap, so I take it out. I think I even wrote the number on them. Got to remember the
right.
sequence. I think some of those animated GIFs, if you go to Penumbra Foundation or at Penumbra Tintype Studio, that Instagram, you can see some of those animated GIFs, and there might be one of mine as well.
And so the lenses were individual lenses that you had, and you put them into this formation of 9
No,
or 4,
I mean,
this is the way it came?
they came. Those 9 lenses was a gem camera, so you would make 9 images. So say for tintype, if everybody in the family wanted a picture of grandma, and say there were several siblings and they all had photo album back then. That's how they kept their images, and even now. But I mean, back then the photo album was really the way people kept their images, and was the media of the day was the photo album. Everybody wanted a picture of grandma, so that would make 9 at one time. They would cut them up with tin snips,
Okay.
or they would make glass negatives and they would print them. Or sometimes mourning pins. Sometimes if you had somebody who passed away, they would make these little tin type mourning pins, and everybody would get a pin, and you can make 9. So it's sort of mass production. The wonderful thing about this camera is that it really allows me to sort of use modern digital technology when we make the animated GIF, and it's a lot of fun to do. So the lenses, for the most part, have to come as a set because they were a match set. So the manufacturer, these were all hand ground, so they would probably have in front of them, whoever assembled them on the assembly line, hundreds of these lenses, and they would have to put each lens into its bank and then check the focus to make sure that they were all focusing in the same place, because the only focus was in the camera. The lenses themselves weren't focusing.
So they all had to be seated properly.
They had to be seated properly and focused properly. And, Frank and I actually went through that. We had a set that oftentimes either they lose elements and people replace them, or one of the tubes goes missing. We try to put another one and they never quite match. So it's ideal if you can find a set that's in good condition, that hasn't been modified, and were collimated by the factory at the time. And these two sets are the only two that I have that are actually, and then you have to use them correctly. You have to level it, and you can't have it tilted. So and then the lighting, especially in the studio, is very important, because even if you're off by a little bit, the exposure on one will be different than the other. But even back in the day, they had exposure issues because they weren't all exactly ground the same. They didn't render the light. And I was looking at some old stereo images recently, and the exposures are always off between one and the other. It was driving me crazy that mine were off, and I was trying to get the exposures right. And then I went back and looked at old stereo cards, and I realized they didn't get it either. So that was, that's part of the, part of the charm, I guess, the problem with it. So when I decided to do this, I had a wet plate back, and somebody had made an insert for it, but it wasn't focusing correctly. And somebody made it out of an old lens board, I think. So I brought it to Frank, and he said, "Oh, well, the ground glass is not collimated to the, to the wet plate back." So Frank,
I was telling him that for weeks. He wouldn't listen to me, though. I'm glad you finally got through to him.
To find the problem, and then he built the inside. He made a new plate holder that fit into the, a new. I guess it's a, what would you call it? It's an insert that goes into the wet plate back that was collimated. He had a depth. I think I had the depth. It's called the depth gauge.
Right.
That, of course, I bought a long time ago for something else. And he said, "I need a depth gauge." I said, "Oh, I have one." And I went back, and there it was. And he was able to match up where the plate fell inside the holder to the ground glass. And that made the whole camera functional.
Are there any companies, how many companies are still left making bellows?
Well, that's always the problem, isn't it? Yeah.
There are not that many people manufacturers. There's still the
Custom bellows.
Custom bellows in England, right?
Yeah.
And there is I found a U.S. bellows manufacturer makes bellows extremely well. Custom makes them. It's not cheap though. They work really well for a lot of these old cameras.
Because this is critical, because bellows are integral to a lot of these cameras.
Yeah, it depends on the size. It usually takes a good month to get them, for them to manufacture them. I'll send them the sizes. A camera this size, you're looking at an easy $400 or $450 for the bellows to be made. And then, of course, a lot of times I will have to transfer the bellows or install the bellows onto either remake frames for them. So they're either, depends on the camera, they have to be mounted on there different ways. Each camera is a little bit different. But I either have to salvage the frames of the old bellows and repair them, or sometimes make a whole new frame and then install those bellows and then onto the camera itself.
What would you recommend if somebody has an older camera that they're using, and it's not unusual to have little pinholes at the very corners where they fold? For a fast repair, what would you recommend, just as something to get you through the day?
Gaffer's tape.
That is the best.
That works wonders, like in any situation on set. You can get away with gaffer's tapes for a good while. The only problem with it is if you leave it on there too long, the glue will dry out and it will stick, as you know, when you gaffer tape, and then a lot of cleanup has to do.
And don't use electrical tape.
It can also pull any moisture out of leather bellows, the vintage bellows, and which can cause them to crack and get worse. So if you do have to do, I always say I recommend it in a pinch, do it, but don't leave it on there. If you generally do get pinholes on all the corners of the bellows, especially cameras of this vintage. If they're the only issue with bellows, with patching bellows, you would want to do the whole length of the bellows with a strip of fabric that's light tight.
It's like rubberized fabric,
yellow
material.
That's if that's the rest of the bellows are in good shape, you can get away with that. Now you can't necessarily do that with some of the cameras that fold up or close up like a Deerdorf.
Oh yeah,
because those if you put two in, you won't be able to close them up.
Yeah, compression.
And the compression of the bellows. So that will become an issue there. So that has to be dealt with in different ways. in that sense. But
You could always just, if worse comes to worse, you could always, something I used to do on occasion. I had one bellows that was problematic. When I was ready to go, I just used to take my dark cloth, drape it over the bellows.
Well, that was the whole purpose.
Yeah.
People forget about that. Reason why they had that big in those days is nothing. They were all wooden. The wood expands, it closes. So you're going to get cracks and space here and there. And even back then, they were going to get light leaks or pinholes in their bellows. Often, if you look at a lot of the old vintage photos, you see the photographer with that over their head, but all the way to the front of the camera.
Yeah.
From the front all the way back and over their back.
Actually put clips on the front standard to hold it in place.
And that was the whole purpose, just to keep any of that, because nothing was perfect then.
Nothing is perfect now. I may tell people, if you get a brand new camera, there's these new Intrepid cameras, which are quite nice. They're inexpensive, 4x5. They just came out with an 8x10. And a new Chamonix camera. Chamonix makes magnificent cameras, which I love. But any new camera you should take out and check for pinholes, because when they manufacture them, they're not perfect. Or check for light leaks.
And what about modern lenses? Do you have any reason to put a modern lens on an older camera? When I say modern, I mean
modern is the relative term.
Yeah.
For view cameras. I don't know how many. A lot of. I mean, for me, a modern lens would be like a Schneider, a Simar, or something like that. There are lenses that I like that are relatively modern. There's a Zenitar 2.8 or 150, which is a large format 4x5 lens, a speed lens. They for film they're wonderful, and when you're shooting larger format, you're getting high resolution because of the size of the negative to begin with. And if you're shooting color, you need a coated lens. And if you want a particular look, if you want a very modern look, you want a multi-coated lens. If you want something with a little more flare, a little more edge, then you want a single coated lens. A Kodak commercial Ektar, the magnificent lens, both for black and white and color. It's a lens that Avedon used. If you're using wet plate, which is a kind of a contrasty, if done a certain way, especially with strobe, you don't want a coated lens at all. Right. So, that comes into play. And I think with modern lenses, the more modern, the more clinical they are. So if you want, funk, if you want bokeh, if you want, the out of focus layer to give a certain, if you want a curved field, if you want these different kinds of looks, the more modern they are, the more corrected they are. And for me, the more boring they are.
Well, exactly. Franklin, other than what Jeff requests of you, what are your common requests? And will you Frankencamera a 35 millimeter film camera with some other?
I haven't had many requests for 35 millimeters. It's usually this medium to large format stuff that I get requests. The only ones that are that I get a little similar are modifying the Super Ds and putting the graph lock backs on them, so they have that versatility and putting in sync and stuff. But when it comes to any of this stuff, a lot of it is a case by case basis and individual vision and what they're trying to accomplish.
Anything that is just sticking in your craw, something that you want to make work that hasn't worked yet, or you think it will work if you put more time into it?
Well, I'm working on, one of the things, this camera that I love, that I think Frank has one of them, maybe I took it back and remember, it's the Machiflex. I love that.
That's your most recent project, I think.
That, and also the SL66, the Rolleiflex SL66, which is basically a Hasselblad on steroids, because it has bellows, it has front movements, and
you flip the lenses around and.
Yeah, and oftentimes, I think I want to do. Yeah, I want to do it. You can flip the lenses around, so you can do this wonderful macro. And a lot of times, I want Frank to do something, but he's so busy, and I feel guilty, pulling him aside to do it. I modified the Rolleiflex SL66 with a universal iris, and instead of finding the machine screws and tapping them, which I guess I could have done and everything, I just took some Velcro and I just slapped it on there, and it worked. And then with the Machiflex. I wanted to have I put a universal iris on that. I put a universal iris on everything because you can swap out lenses. But I wanted a chimney hood for it. They're very hard to find for that camera. So the Machiflex is a plow bell. It's a 9x9 centimeter. And I love square. This is a wonderful, beautiful format, but it's really perfect for Instagram, And I don't like to crop. I'm not a cropper. Some people like to crop. Nothing wrong with that. But I like a pure format. It's the beautiful round corners.
Where do you look for gear for pieces, accessories? Is there maybe you don't want to give up sources, but is there any?
Well,
I mean, eBay may be pretty much like you said.
eBay is probably the best place, but eBay is kind of drying up. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff is drying up. I look at flea markets. I go to antique shows. People sometimes just contact me. I have stuff I want to get rid of. Estate sales.
I would imagine you're known you're very well known at this point for a lot of this eclectic photographic stuff. And I was just saying, I imagine a lot of people do contact you.
Oh yeah, they do. Sure. I don't like selling stuff. I mean, because at this point, if you sell it, it's not replaceable. But I do advise. I love the idea. I mean, I run a nonprofit organization, educational organization, Arts and Education, and I want people to make images. So if I don't have something, or if I don't have a duplicate, I say, well, you don't need to spend a lot of money. I tell them what to do. I help them. I send them to Frank if they want to modify a camera.
Do we have any left over there? Any?
Well, this is the.
This is
just a smaller version of a Super D, and what this has is
Polaroid back.
a Polaroid modification
yeah.
to take a pack film back. Okay.
Is there? Can you still get pack film for this now, or no? It's gone, isn't it?
They don't make it anymore, and I've been talking to Frank about modifying some of these Fuji Instax cameras, so that we can get. And some people are already doing it. There's a couple of people that are, charging. Charge a lot of money, $600 for an Instax back. But
to shoot Instax film on these old cameras.
yes,
Okay.
Right.
So we talk about that. It's the time factor, and Frank can do it. It's just a matter of he has to get repairs done, and I totally understand that. The other thing that I'm looking into, and Eric was the one that brought this up, is this Canon selfie printer. Mm-hmm. If you use it with your Sony Alpha with a funky lens, and you can walk around with this little printer, then you can make these really nice images with a funky lens. So you're giving us something that's more interesting than just sort of a clinical digital picture.
Wait a minute, is this printer battery operated?
It is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's Wi-Fi as well,
It's
right?
Wi-Fi. I think it's Wi-Fi. You put the chip in, you can take the chip out of your camera, you can print it right there.
Yeah.
So that opens up a whole,
That's right. Yeah.
sort of a photo booth sort of thing.
The new Polaroid.
Yeah, the new Polaroid.
And this lens here was something that was added.
Yes, so that lens was added to the camera on the front of the standard because it was too long and too big to go inside the bay of the camera. So I modified the front standard so that I could put that lens on that camera. And then Frank modified the Polaroid back so that it would fit into the back of the camera. And that has been a workhorse, that camera, And I just want to point out, when Frank builds something, it is built to last. It is, thought out. He's one of the most patient people. What's up with me? So he's one of the most patient people I've ever met. And even it's funny, like he's in the middle, he can multitask. He's in the middle, looking for a tiny little screw, and I'll come up to him and in the most patient way, he's like, yeah, you do this and whatever. And then he goes back to what he's doing. And,
Frank, there's a question for you. We're talking about how meticulous you are and careful, which you have to be for this. You're dealing with a lot of cameras where we are dealing with wood that's over a century old, and it become very, very tricky to work with. Do you take extra precautions before you start drilling or tapping or modifying a lot of these wood surfaces or any of these other materials?
I always check my measurements and double check, triple check things and stuff because it's they can easily crack and things like that. It's dried out wood. But again, the wood was kiln dried very well back then, and unlike a lot of the wood that you get today, so it's held up very well. Mm-hmm. Most of these cameras are made of good quality woods. A lot of them are, believe it or not, mahogany underneath that leather.
Yeah, they're fine Honduran mahogany.
Yeah, so it's beautiful wood under there. If you've ever seen one of these totally stripped down,
they're gorgeous.
It's
almost a shame to cover them up again.
Yeah, exactly. I do take care. Every one of them is different. So whenever I do a modification of putting a graph log back on there or modifying a Polaroid back to fit on there, I often request that if the customer can have the camera, bring in the camera and leave it with me. Mm-hmm. So I get that exact fit for that particular camera. that way to prevent any light leaks or anything like that, because there, like we
I
discussed
would think
before,
that's mandatory to have that camera with you.
I usually request or ask for that. There are times that they don't want to give it up because, of course, they want to be making images.
I just there was a repair that Frank did. I just want to mention because it just shows how meticulous he is. And I don't know if I should mention the photographer. I mean, Frank can if he wants to. But there's a thing called a bag mag, which is a magazine that holds I think something like 12 plates for film. It was rapid. It wasn't quite rapid fire, but there was something called a Graphmatic holder. But this is the pre-Graphmatic.
Oh, this was for Paul. You're talking about?
For Paul. Yeah. And it's a magazine that you can put on the back of a Graflex that holds 12 sheets of film. And then you would shoot it, and then you would pull this rod, and it would pull out that sheet into the bag, and then you would replace it in the back, so that you can in succession shoot instead of carrying all these film holders. You just have all the film. In fact, I used one of those when I shot at Yankee Stadium opening day 2016. I bought the Big Bertha,
right?
And I shot that. And what happened was during the rapid, I actually tore some of the bags. They were so old. I got some wonderful light leaks, wonderful
The
streaks.
leather was pretty
dry
much
rot, pretty much dead.
Yeah.
And so Frank got in for repair to remake the bag mags, and not only did he, he cut out the leather perfectly, made the template. He even made the liner. These had a cloth liner to prevent any other light leaking, and I couldn't believe how magnificent and beautiful that bag mag was when he was done with it. Did it, almost exactly the way they would have done it in the factory. That
was the first time I attempted that project of restoring the leather pouch on those magazines.
Is that part of the thrill, the challenge? Someone says you can't do something?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I get a lot of thrill out of that. It's a challenge for me, and even I have cameras down there that people have given up already. I haven't.
Yeah.
And they say, I said, no, I still have your camera here. I still do it every now and then and see what I can do. Because I'm just a believer in that. Eventually I will. And many times I've had a lot of success. There's a lot of times that, I did have to give up.
Okay, we can go on all day here.
For sure, right?
I know, and actually I think we'd all like to do that, but we do have limitations. Jeff, first of all, thanks, guys, for hosting us here today. It's terrific. If our listeners want to learn more about the Penumbra Foundation and the Center of Alternative Photography, what should they be doing?
Website is a really good place to go, penumbrafoundation.org. So we're a nonprofit photographic arts and education. We teach workshops in original and historical photographic processes. We have a lecture series. We actually have a lecture coming up tonight. Vito Worms, I don't know, this is probably not going to air in time, but the website is a good place. We have all kinds of events here. We have a membership program. It's a wonderful way to support us. We support artists who are working in these processes.
It's a great facility here, too. It's really, really mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I just want to point, I know Frank for 15 years. He was at London Repro, and when they closed up, I was... found out that Frank didn't know where Frank was going to end up, and I recruited him. I said, "Come here," and I'm very happy that he did because he really adds to the overall organization. It's another element of the organization,
it's a piece of the puzzle.
But you basically have your own business that's just housed here. That's the idea.
Correct.
And what's your info for that?
Well, CameraDoctorNYC.com. We have a website, and of course through the Penumbra Foundation as well. They got us on their website. We have Instagram, Camera Doctor NYC too. So Facebook, and we try. We may deal with this old school stuff, but we try to keep up with the.
I just also wanted to point out that this place has been here for 15 years, and it just started as workshops, but now we have studio spaces, Highlight Studios, which was run separately, is now part of Penumbra. So we have commercial studio spaces with a full complement of digital and pro photo that are part of Penumbra, and the proceeds go to our organization. There's a photo lab next door, LTI Lightside. So you have, photo lab, cam repair.
LTI is my lab. That's where I drop all my film.
There's
one-stop shopping.
We have lecture series, residency program, tintype studio, all on this little spot, 36 East 30th Street, and it's really been a wonderful journey.
It's incredible.
Developing this organization, and we thank you, we thank B&H, we thank Allan and John and Jason for doing this, because I think it's wonderful to get the word out on wonderful working with you guys.
And we enjoyed doing it. If you are not a subscriber, pull over to the side of the road right now, drop whatever you're doing, and head on over to iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, SoundCloud, or YouTube, and sign up for instant access to every show we do, along with access to over 100 past episodes. And while you're there, leave a comment. Ask us something you've been dying to ask us but have been too bashful to ask, or simply say hi. We'll keep an eye out for your messages. On behalf of Jeff Berliner of the Penumbra Foundation, Frank Rubio, the camera doctor, Jason Tables, John Harris, and myself, thank you so much for joining us today.